of Customer Accessibility. For the second half today, we will have with us from Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, Professor David Lepofsky, who is the chair. And of course, from the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, we have Heather Walkus, who's the national chair, joining us by video conference. We'll begin with our first panel, however, and for that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Rousseau for 5-minute opening remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Is he close?
Perhaps someone else from Air Canada, Mr. Stevens or Mr. Ho or Ms. Wilson would like to provide the opening remarks on behalf of Mr. Rousseau.
Can we just...
Or we can suspend for 2 minutes. Okay, why don't we suspend for 2 minutes to ensure that we have no issues with relation to Mr. Rousseau. So we will do that. We'll suspend for 2 minutes and give a chance for Mr. Rousseau to take his chair and check the AV. This meeting back to order. And once again, I will turn the floor over to you, Monsieur Rousseau. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci à Beaujon. Let me assure the committee, people with disabilities, and the Canadian public that Air Canada takes very seriously its obligations to ensure our services are accessible. We want to be the preferred airline for people with disabilities. Nous investissons déjà des ressources importantes pour l'accessibilité et nous
We already invest in accessibility and we can do better.
Carries hundreds of thousands of customers who require mobility assistance or other accommodation. We invest significant resources in accessibility. We have been and will continue to be a leader. In January, we became the first carrier in North America to adopt the Sunflower program for customers with non-visible disabilities. And we're also the first in Canada to enable customers to track their checked mobility devices in real time. In addition, we've updated our policy around priority boarding and storage of mobility aids. Also at the start of 2024, we created a customer advisory committee comprised of representatives from 4 Canadian accessibility groups. We were a key participant in drafting the Canadian Transportation Agency's mobility aids and air travel final report. We are proud of the contribution to this government-led initiative. Air Canada was one of the first airlines to waive liability limits in international treaties to pay the full cost for damaged mobility equipment. I sit on the board of the International Air Transport Association, which represents 250 airlines worldwide. Air Canada was a key member of its Mobility Aid Action Group. We endorsed the Accessibility Canada Act and its goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040. As part of this, we publicly filed the 3-year accessibility plan, which we are currently implementing. Our plan includes 145 far-ranging new initiatives based on a year of research, expert consultations, and feedback from travelers with disabilities who took over 220 flights. We've been pleased to provide a copy to the committee members for your review. Our employees, third-party international contractors, and the entire leadership team have a high awareness, a strong work ethic, and deep empathy for this very important customer segment. Hundreds of thousands of customers requiring assistance successfully travel each year. In 2023, across our network, we received nearly 1.3 million special assistance requests from our passengers. Based on the number of incidents reported, the vast majority had a positive experience. In terms of those requiring wheelchairs and mobility devices, in about 0.15% of these instances, customers contacted us to report a negative experience. Overall, our records show that in 2023, about 100 accessibility-related complaints were filed with CTA related to our services. This is not to minimize the number of incidents, nor the serious impacts disruptions have on the individuals involved. But it's an important context that indicates, first, we do a good job, and second, more importantly, we need and will continue to get better. Our industry is more complex than others. However, I believe that if all our partners work together, we can remove all barriers for air travel. While the causes behind these negative experiences differ, we have concluded the chief issue is inconsistency. And the best remedy for this is provide our people, who all want to do a good job serving customers, with more and better tailored training and tools so they succeed every time. For example, our 10,000 airport employees will receive extra disability-related instruction as part of a new recurrent annual training program. Apart from reinforcing processes, it will promote better understanding. In addition, our frontline and management groups are required to complete a specially designed training program put together with expert advice, which includes content on the principles that all persons must be treated with dignity and barriers removed. A good parallel is airline safety. Incidents still occur, but aviation today is the safest mode of travel. This was achieved through our industry's willingness to examine and learn from mistakes, to constantly refine processes, adopt new technology or add redundancy, and through continual and better training. We are well aware of the effects that disruption has on our customers with disabilities. When we fail, we are incredibly disappointed because it affects a person's quality of life. In these cases, we apologize and we take responsibility. However, what we hear is that our customers' overriding concern is always that we act to make sure whatever happened to them does not happen to others. This is why our leadership team and all employees at Air Canada are committed to improve. And we are striving each day to deliver a positive experience for every customer. We know we must and can do better. Nous sommes prêts pour répondre.
We're ready to answer your questions.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rousseau. Before I turn the floor over to Mr. Stroll, I just want to apologize to one of our witnesses today, who I believe I mispronounced your first name. It's Carrie Ann. I want to make sure I get that on the record. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Stroll. Mr. Stroll, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the folks at Air Canada for being here today. We've heard, obviously, from a number of Canadians who have had difficult experiences, and I think probably the person for whom this study was, why we kicked this off was a high-profile case of Stephanie Cadieux being without her specialized wheelchair for a time when that was left behind, and she talked about the difficulties that brought upon her. And we've heard again from numerous people how a mobility aid is not simply like a piece of luggage. It is an extension of a person. It is what allows them to have independence, and how upsetting it is, both physically, it can take days to recover from having to use a non-specialized piece of equipment, and I think there is also a mental component. It's once again those folks being subjected to being second-class citizens. So I want to understand from Air Canada's perspective how you are going to ensure. I heard the stat there that you shared, 0.15%. How are you ensuring that that gets down to zero? And secondly, as part of that, what is the response from Air Canada when this happens? You say you have lessons learned. What happens when this is so high profile and you say that you have already taken steps to increase training and have a sensitivity towards this issue? What happens when an Air Canada employee fails in their duty to serve a person with a disability? Is there a reprimand? What are the steps that are taken to ensure that this is treated with the seriousness that it deserves?
Well, thank you for the questions, and I agree with you on your points. In regard to the first question, what are we doing? A lot of these situations happened before we initiated a number of changes as part of our accessibility plan, which was posted last June. In terms of mobility aids, now we've changed our policies to be much more customer friendly. One, if we can put the mobility aid in the cabin of the plane, if it's foldable, if it can fit, we will put it in the cabin of the plane. If it can't fit in the cabin of a plane because it's too large, then it will go in cargo. It will go in as priority, so it will go in last, and it will come off first. Two, customers have the ability to go to a mobile application and monitor the status of their mobility aid in the cargo to make sure it's on the plane. And three, to protect the mobility aid, in many of our planes, we put them in different compartments by themselves. In the planes that don't have separate compartments, we pack it separately, so it's not part of the other cargo on the plane. So we believe these measures will minimize, if hopefully eliminate, some of the situations you've heard of in the past. On the second point you've made, first of all, we call all customers who contact us with a negative experience. Carrie Ann can certainly expand on that, but she speaks to them about their experience and gets feedback, and then we incorporate that in our lessons learned. In regards to an employee that made a mistake, like in safety, we want employees to tell us what's going wrong, and that's a non-punitive issue. So we will train that employee to a greater degree. We'll put him or her through special training, reinforce the training. If that person is not great at that job or does not continue to improve, then we may reassign that person. But we want to first start with training of that individual to make sure that they understand the processes, that they're sensitive to the needs of the customer, and then we'll monitor the performance of that employee on a go-forward basis.
One of the things that we've heard in this study is the different models that are used around the world, including the European model, where it's actually the airport that is responsible for getting an individual who requires extra assistance from the curbside to the airplane. What is your view of? Do you feel that approach, that sort of a system, would prevent some of the failures that we've seen over the last number of months, in that there's perhaps less opportunities for someone to be lost in the handoff between security, et cetera? And it also would mean you'd have, right now, I'd assume at an airport like Pearson or Vancouver, dozens of airlines, each with a different approach to a person with a disability. What is your view on going to an airport service delivery model, as opposed to every airline having a different approach and having that responsibility to get the individuals onto their aircraft.
Thank you. It's a very interesting concept, and of course, Air Canada has experience flying around the world with both models, here domestically and outside Canada. Again, it has merit. I think it certainly has merit for smaller airports in Canada to consolidate services. We'd have to spend some more time thinking about the larger hubs where there's much more activity. It would require a different level of coordination between different partners, the airport and the airline. I think those are all areas that we should spend some time looking at to improve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russo. Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here before us today. We've heard time and time again at this committee and, in the news that it's not a surprise to anyone that there have been incidents where, passengers with disabilities feel that their experience is not what it was sold to be. So I'm interested to find out from you, what have you added in your training to the employees that was different before 2023 and with your new training program right now? I heard in your testimony, Mr. Russo, that it's an annual training. Are there any thoughts to perhaps increasing the frequency of that training? And what specifically are they being trained on?
Well, thank you for the question. And so it is annual recurrent training. If we require more training, then certainly that's an option for us to put in place. Certainly all new employees would receive the training, and all existing 10,000 at least employees would receive the annual recurrent training. As to the actual details behind the training, it's basically two different buckets. One is process, what has to happen, what has to occur to ensure the customer has a positive experience. And two, sensitivity, the needs of that customer, the fact that that mobility aid is critical to that customer. And so those two aspects are kind of the two areas of focus. But if I can easily refer the question to Carrie Ann, who's much closer to the training program, and provide you a little more detail.
Thank you very much for the question and for the opportunity to speak before you. As Mr. Russo explained it really is those two kind of categories. But something that we think it's important to point out is that the regulatory requirement is only every 3 years. And this is a decision that Air Canada has made to go well above and beyond, because we believe that it's really important to keep hard skills and soft skills fresh. We're also trying to take a more holistic view so that it's not just a training session that people go to, attend. We really want it to permeate throughout their job. And so we've started looking at different ways to allow our staff to interact with customers. Just as one example, we had a customer workshop a couple weeks ago where we had 2 customers come in and meet directly with a wide range of staff, management, frontline managers, frontline staff, to really have that personalized connection to our customers to understand what it is to travel. In this case, it was traveling with a mobility aid, a power mobility aid, understanding that human aspect of it. So we're really looking at how you can scale up that kind of training approach to all of our employees.
So for the longer term and for people, Canadians with disabilities or traveling on Air Canada, I'm just looking for some insight as to what your business plans are or what they include for future aircraft infrastructure. We've heard from passengers with disabilities that they are calling out the industry for not considering the needs of passengers with disabilities in the design of aircraft. In particular, it's duly noted by many advocates that washrooms are not designed for use by anybody who is not in perfect physical condition, and they are certainly not wheelchair accessible. These same advocates also speak loudly of the need for aircraft to be able to accommodate passengers to stay seated in their own mobility devices. As you can imagine, passengers who are traveling with these disabilities, it speaks to their dignity What kind of commitment can Air Canada do today when they're considering the design of their future fleet that they can help these passengers fly with the dignity that they deserve?
Well, thank you for the question. A very complex area and a very important area to take accessibility to another level. There are many safety issues about putting wheelchairs on planes. Seats, we go through a very complex regulatory review of the interior of the plane to make sure it's safe for all customers. So that's one aspect that we have to always adhere to. On the one that you mentioned about washrooms, so you're absolutely right with your comment. And our team, Carrie Ann and the team, are speaking to Boeing and to Airbus, the two principal manufacturers of airplanes, especially about our narrow bodies, which are those smaller planes, which are more difficult to get into, about redesigns to allow a wheelchair or a customer with a disability into more comfortably into that washroom. That work's underway right now, so we're committed to continue to work with Boeing and Airbus to see if we can find a solution on future planes, or maybe even remodeling existing planes in the near future that would satisfy your question.
35 seconds, Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And very quickly, I was just wondering if you'd be able to talk to us a little bit about the resolution of complaints. What happens from the minute someone makes a complaint to resolution? How many, and if you don't have time to answer during this time, perhaps you can send us information later. How many complaints have you received since 2023, and how many have been resolved?
Right. Well, again, based on the 1.3 million requests for accommodations, we received about 2,000 complaints overall in 2023. Each of those are resolved different ways, either personally through Carrie Ann or through our customer relations department. But certainly, we can send you a more detailed process list of how we handle those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Rousseau, and we would very much welcome that information. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses, specifically Mr. Rousseau, for being here with us today. Of course, today we're here because there have been a number of cases, many cases over the last few months and in the last year, of individuals with disabilities having a hard time, in fact, a harder time actually at Air Canada than elsewhere. You are aware of the cases. I think it is important to note them. Something fell on the head of a passenger who was using a respirator. He forgot to bring on board an individual's wheelchair. A person fell out of the arms of an Air Canada staffer, despite the fact that there was a individual who had to drag himself out of the plane because there was no assistance for him. There was a complaint from the Paralympic Olympians who were saying that there's a generalized problem at Air Canada. In your opening statement, you said it amounts to 0.15% of situations that end up like this. I'm wondering, how can you explain the difference in perception between what would be maybe 100 complaints according to you and actually a large number of events that have been in the media and elsewhere for the last little while? My perception is it's much more broadly the case than 15%.
Well, thank you for the question. And so it's 0.15%, 15 basis points. And I take your comments. It's probably underreported. I understand that, but that's not the issue. Our issue is we know we need to get better. We're putting a number of initiatives in place to minimize, if not eliminate, these occurrences. We run a very complex industry, as I spoke about in my opening comments. It is very emotional at times as well, because obviously customers want to get somewhere with everything they brought to the airport. And so I think my belief, and certainly the team's belief here, is that we will get better. We are getting better with the initiatives we already put in place that we've outlined. We are now putting customers with disabilities on first on the plane. We are putting them at the front of the cabin, so that makes their situation much more easy. As I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with our mobility aids much better than we have been in the past. We're training all our people. We put it in the Sunflower program for hidden disabilities. And we're continuing to consult with well-respected disability groups to get better. And so this is a continuous improvement process. But again, I think we do a good job to begin with, but we need to do better.
Oui, parlant de besoin de faire.
Speaking of the need to do better, I think that the point you raised about the fact that there may be an underestimation of numbers of cases, there might be a higher number than what has been reported. One individual appeared before the committee said that as a person with a disability, every time she has to take a flight, she expects to have a problem. It's not as though she may have a problem, she's certain of it. I find that fascinating. When you look at the reported cases in the media, you can see that Air Canada seems to be highly overrepresented. We commend the initiatives that you are intending to implement and that you've already implemented. I think that has to be recognized. That said, recently, it has to be said that you were before the courts. There was a challenge, the Transportation Safety Board asking you to allow for wheelchairs into the cabin and to have planes that would be able to accommodate travelers. Let's say something were not available, that there could be a switch in planes so that these wheelchairs could enter the cabin. How do you explain the fact that you say that you're making efforts, and that's what you've been communicating, but on the other hand, you're challenging the orders from the Transportation Board that would be supportive of individuals with disabilities?
Again, thank you for the question. The case you're referring to goes back to 2016 when Mr. Rose wanted to go to, I believe, Cleveland, and we couldn't fit his wheelchair in the small plane we had at that time. And we wanted to accommodate Mr. Rose. We actually worked with him to see if we could put him in a limo to another airport. We looked at another flight. We looked at alternatives for him to get there and with his wheelchair. And so when the CTA came out with their ruling, we disagreed with it. And so it's nothing about Mr. Rose or about our commitment to getting customers with disabilities to their intended destinations. We didn't agree with the CTA's recommendations or rulings. And so the only option we have is to go to court or appeal that ruling. And so, again, you need to separate those two issues, our commitment to getting customers with disabilities to their intended departure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rousseau. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rousseau, in your opening, you chose to cite the percentage of trips taken by people with disabilities that resulted in a complaint, and you cited the number of 0.15%. And it makes it sound like a small problem. It seems to diminish the importance of the issue. I'm wondering why you made that choice in your opening remarks.
Well, I think right after I presented the numbers, and we want to be transparent with the facts that we have. That was one of the purposes and objectives of coming to the committee and to anyone we speak to about this very, very important situation. My next comment was that I'm not diminishing this issue. We are spending time, effort, investing to get better. We know, despite the numbers I presented in my opening comments, that we need to get better. And again, I've given this committee at least half a dozen significant process changes that we put in place in the last 6 months that will make it better. And we'll continue to make process changes and invest in training, especially to ensure that we minimize, if not eliminate, these mistakes that we made.
I guess what I'm wondering, Mr. Russo, is why you didn't start by saying we have a big, serious problem. How much money did Air Canada make in 2023?
In 2023, we made roughly $2 billion.
$2 billion. And how much money did Air Canada invest specifically in improving the experience of people with disabilities?
Again, that's a fair question. I don't have that number at the tip of my
Ms. Wilson
fingers.
have the number, perhaps?
I don't have. No, we don't have the number. And the reason for that is that we do have, certainly we have numbers where we invested in equipment. We have a labor force that's dedicated to this to some degree. But there is also many other costs that are built in other costs, technology, training, that we need to pull out to get a fair number. But I would estimate that if it's not in the tens of millions, it's certainly in the high millions dollars investment per year.
Do you track those investments? You said earlier that you're investing significant resources. That statement must have been based on something.
Well, we're training 10,000 people a year now on annual recurrent. That is a significant investment. For one example, we're buying new equipment to more Eagle lifts, for example, for more airports and for more redundancy. Well, that's another investment that we're making. But beyond all that, there is a series of technology improvements that we're making as part of overall other programs that are hard to pull out. But again,
Mr. Russo, would you be willing to pull those numbers together and table them with the committee? I think it would be very edifying and useful for our study.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I'll take that back and see if our finance and other groups can pull together those numbers where it makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Later in this meeting, we're going to be hearing from two representatives of prominent disability advocacy organizations in Canada. Neither of them have been contacted to provide input on Air Canada's accessibility plan. Would you be willing to meet with these individuals personally?
Again, we've put together a committee of 4 well-respected disability groups: Barrier Free Canada, Brain Injury Canada, Spinal Cord Injury Canada, and Karula, and hopefully I pronounced that right. But certainly, we're willing to speak to other groups as well, and whether it's myself or Carrie Ann, who's obviously our leader in this area, our director of accessibility. Certainly, we would look forward to meeting with anyone, including your 2 next guests.
Yeah, that would be fabulous, Mr. Russo. I had a chance to meet Mr. Lepofsky from the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. I notice he's wearing the Order of Canada pin. We're also joined today by Heather Walkus from the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. I know both of them would very much like to meet with you and discuss your company's plan. So if you could arrange that, it would be much appreciated. The last question for this round is around voluntary versus obligatory actions by airlines. We heard from WestJet at a previous meeting. We heard from Air Canada today. There are voluntary actions that the airlines are taking. My question is whether that's enough to ensure a consistent experience for people traveling with disabilities. Should we not consider strong national regulations that are properly enforced so that there aren't laggards in the industry that aren't taking these voluntary actions like the ones you've outlined and like WestJet outlined?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. Again, I'm looking at it from Air Canada's perspective. We're committed to this, and you've heard all the actions we're putting in place and our commitment to continue to improve. hopefully other airlines follow our lead, and certainly we're willing to share with other airlines our processes as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russo, and thank you, Mr. Backrack. We'll begin our second round of questioning with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Chair, and my question is to Mr. Russo. Yesterday, Canada's Minister of Transport got up and he jumped to his feet and said, I know, we'll have a summit, because that has worked so well, of course, with auto thefts, which we heard from the police chief in Toronto today are actually up again. According to his own words, he conferred with a cabinet colleague, and they said there must be action now. And they set a date of May 9th, 2 months from now, for this action now, which one can imagine will result in a report with a fancy cover and logo, perhaps the 9th of September, followed by some implementation of some recommendations, perhaps the 9th of March next year. So I guess my question is, what would you see is the point of a summit? Because you've already talked about some of the actions that you've been taken, and we've heard from WestJet some of the actions that they've been taken, and we can sit here and question whether that's enough or fast enough or you care enough or taking it seriously enough. But what is the point of a summit 2 months from now to take immediate action other than a photo op to make it look like the Liberals are doing something about a problem they should have dealt with years ago and pretending to care about it? So what is your comment on that? What is the value other than a photo op?
Thank you for the question. I think there's value. There's always value in sharing information among participants, and just not airlines, but other modes of transportation as well. We can all learn from each other, and certainly to increase. And although I believe this important area has a very high awareness, it will continue to maintain its high awareness level. But again, I think sharing information and sharing processes and sharing lessons learned is always a positive thing.
Okay, so I guess in 2 months we'll share some information. To Ms. Wilson, it was referred to that you actually call and take feedback from those that have had negative customer experiences. So maybe, and I imagine some actions are taken in response to some of those. So maybe there's an illustrative example that you think would be a good one that had a good outcome, and you could expand on that a bit, just so we understand sort of the processes and the steps.
Sure, that'll be my pleasure. So as one example, if a customer, if I hear about an incident either through one of my airport colleagues, or it could be another colleague who's received an email, it gets sent to me. I look at it as a first glance, and then I always have help figuring out what happened, getting feedback from either the airports involved or on board the aircraft. I reach out either through myself or through one of my colleagues, a senior colleague in customer relations. We have a very dedicated team that works on accessibility. But the point of having those phone calls is really to understand directly from the customer what the impact of the incident was on them. And often, even though I've seen some of these incidents before, I learned something new that I've never heard before. So as one example, I spoke with a customer who just put it extremely succinctly. Whenever they travel, this was someone who uses a powered mobility aid. Whenever they travel, they're going on vacation. Their vacation doesn't start the same way that it does for us when we turn on an out-of-office message, for example. They are not on vacation until they arrive, and they have been reunited with their power chair. And so that small explanation of reality for a person with a disability, the value often comes from my ability to then take those examples back and share those with all of my colleagues. It really changes how we view things.
Do you use any specific examples in the training? And do you give feedback to the Air Canada staff that have been involved in that situation?
So yes, just to repeat the question for the recording, what do I do with that feedback? Absolutely. So what I will do is make sure that whatever staff was involved is given that feedback. We often validate, this was the experience for the customer. It might not have seemed that way to you, but this is how they lived it. I will often look at the training curriculum, see whether there's something missing in training, or in some cases, like we spoke about earlier, the frequency of training, the way that training is delivered. Often we'll see that the point in question was covered in training, but perhaps not in a way that really resonated.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. So congratulations on Air Canada's leadership on the Sunflower program. I was happy to hear that. And also the comment that Mr. Russo made that we need to get better, especially process changes and training. So thirdly, there is a commitment to being a leader in accessible travel and employment on your website. And so, Mr. Russo, what are the metrics for being a leader in accessible travel and employment? Have you identified, and in what time frame are you aiming to achieve them?
Well, certainly thank you for the question. Certainly from a customer perspective, we are looking at 2 areas. One, obviously, number of complaints as a percent of customers traveling with disabilities, and continuing to improve that year over year. The second area is we are exploring looking at doing some surveys of our customers with disabilities. As you've heard, Carrie Ann speaks to many customers, but we'd like to speak to as many as possible to provide feedback. And so the scoring on that survey would also indicate to us internally as a benchmark as to how we're doing, and more importantly, how we're improving. So that's certainly from a customer perspective. From an employee perspective, one of the measures we look at is the percent of management that has a disability. And so we measure that internally. We ask our employees for that information. That's probably underreported, but today, roughly 5% of our management group has a self-declared disability, and so I think that's another important measure from an internal perspective.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because that's was my second question. How many of your personnel and contractors in the training activities, whether it's design, planning, or delivery, are persons with disabilities? Because, of course, they would naturally have an affinity with the trainees and probably be effective.
Again, thank you for the question. I don't have the exact details on the training staff as to how many have self-declared disabilities. I can tell you overall at Air Canada, we have roughly 2.2% of our staff overall, the 39,000 employees that we currently have, that have self-declared a disability. We think that's underreported. But it's higher than the average for the air transportation area, which I believe is roughly 1.9%. But I can certainly take it under that. We'll get that information back to you as to the specific training staff, the people that are involved with training others. How many of those people have a self-declared disability?
Well, thank you, and congratulations on having that be something that you measure. So to what degree do you have goals in your hiring, and what are your objectives in terms of number of percentage of personnel at Air Canada with accessibility challenges?
Okay. Again, thank you for the question. So we have a very strong DEI program here at Air Canada that looks to improve the hiring practices to ensure that we have a strong representation of all minority groups. And that includes employees with disabilities as well. I don't have all the stats right in front of me, but certainly, and we do measure ourselves against the greater air transportation industry on all the DEI dimensions. And our current status, from my memory, is we're okay. But we need to get better, and so there will be changes to hiring processes to ensure that we do get better.
So a last question on that.
Unfortunately, Ms. Murray, we don't have time for another question.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Murray, and thank you, Mr. Russo. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll admit, Mr. Rousseau, that I'm somewhat disappointed, despite the announcements you've made, and Air Canada's commitment here seems more serious, or it's as though there's more awareness about the importance of addressing these shortcomings for people with disabilities. Nevertheless, when there are court cases, people are simply asking to be respected and to maintain their own dignity. When the company doesn't want to ensure compliance with these orders, I feel like that's sort of sending the wrong or an odd message. I'm not satisfied with the answer you provided to my last question. Before I close, because I don't have much time, I also wanted to address another issue. Not so long ago, a report was tabled by the Official Languages Commissioner regarding 30 complaints that were evaluated as to providing services in French. When we talk about providing services to clients, of course, we also talk about French language services, and the Official Languages Commissioner provided a dozen or so recommendations, and among 10 of them that were issued by the Official Language Commissioner's Office, Air Canada had not implemented any of them. I understand you are learning French right now. Do you not think that that should just be a given, that Air Canada would implement recommendations made by the Official Languages Commissioner, as it should be the case, to follow the orders from other agencies?
Again, thank you for the question. I'll address the second part first. I mean, certainly we're very proud to support both official languages, to be the only carrier in Canada that does provide service in both official languages. And this file, obviously this area is very, very important to us, like accessibility is, but they are different. And we will read the commissioner's recommendations, and we will have a discussion with the commissioner as to what we think of those recommendations. But that is a completely different course of action versus accessibility.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russo. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wilson, I know Mr. Lepofsky provided you with a brief prior to this meeting, and in that brief there are 19 recommendations from his organization, the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. Have you had a chance to review the 19 recommendations?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I have. As was alluded to before, or perhaps that was in private conversation, Mr. Lepofsky and I have known each other for a couple of years. It was great to hear from him. I appreciated the heads up on the brief. It was only yesterday, so I have read them over. There are some that we have already started working on, so that was quite encouraging to see that we're aligned. I think the best way to accomplish something real and exciting in accessibility is to work hand in hand with the disability community.
Thank you. Mr. Russo, there are other jurisdictions that have stronger regulations in some respects when it comes to people with disabilities. For instance, the committee has heard that in the United States, all of the complaints that are submitted to airlines are handed over to the federal regulator. In Canada, there's no such obligation, and so we essentially have to take your word for it when it comes to complaint data, and every airline reports it differently, and we know there are a lot of instances that go unreported. This is what we've heard from disability advocates. Should Canada not have a system of reporting and transparency that's at least as strong as that in the United States?
Thank you for the question. I think that's a worthwhile venture to explore. Obviously, it has to be some conditions around it. How the data is put together has to be consistent across just not the airline industry, but also other industries that provide customers with disabilities the ability to travel. I think it's unfair to only point out the airline industry. There should be others that should be included that if we wanted a full view of customers with disabilities who want to travel. And I think, much like safety, the information that's provided has to be provided in a non-punitive awareness, because our objective here, our joint objective here, should be to improve the travel experience for customers with disabilities. And so that information will be transparent to all, and initiatives will come out of that information that will improve.
Thank you.
So being non-punitive is also a very important aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Russo, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. We have 8 minutes left, and I'll split the difference. Mr. Strahl, you have 4 minutes for your questioning, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to use my time to move a motion that members of the committee would have received on Friday. And the motion states that given that A, there is very limited transit infrastructure in rural Canada, B, electric vehicles are often not a feasible option in rural Canada, C, rural Canadians often have no other option than to drive gas and diesel-powered vehicles in order to commute and operate their businesses. D, the Liberal government plans to increase the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st. The committee report to the House that it recognizes the disproportionate impact that the carbon tax has on rural Canadians and calls on the Liberal government to spike the hike and axe the tax. Mr. Chair, I think that this is our only one of 2 meetings that we have in the entire month. It's one of the last meetings before that April 1st tax hike comes into effect. The 23% carbon tax hike comes into effect. We know that we do have Minister Guilbeault coming before the committee to explain his No New Roads policy, which will also have a disproportionate impact on rural Canada. So we think that we can have a vote on this motion to send a strong message from this committee that we believe that the government's 23% carbon tax hike will have a disproportionate impact on rural Canadians, and we don't want to see that happen. So I think this is a good opportunity for members, especially those of us that represent rural Canadians, to let our views be known and send that message back to the government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I disagree. I think this is bad timing on the Conservatives to bring such a motion up. We're trying to concentrate on the disability community as well as Air Canada to deal with an issue that has been front of mind for many people throughout the past few years, especially because of the latest incident. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think today we have time for that. I think we want to stick to the issues at hand that this meeting was here for, and maybe Mr. Strahl wants to re-entertain that at a more appropriate time. So I'll move to adjourn debate on this motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. We'll vote by hand. All those in favor of adjourning debate? All those opposed?
7 years, 4 years.
Motion to adjourn debate carries. So we will continue with our line of questioning. How much time did? Okay, so you have 2 minutes, 30 seconds, Mr. Strahl.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rousseau, a lot of the incidents that we heard about involving Air Canada, some of the most high-profile incidents, the one I'm thinking of happened in Las Vegas, at the Las Vegas airport, where there was someone, I believe, that had to drag themselves through the cabin to get out. Obviously, you're dealing with, I assume that's with a contractor outside of Canada. How does Air Canada, how have you revised your approach to dealing with foreign private contractors that you have to rely upon? Have you changed your approach, and if so, how?
Thank you for the question. So, a couple aspects and you're absolutely right. Outside Canada, everything is third-party contractors. So we've strengthened the contract with our third-party contractors, where there is clear standards to perform. And just to provide some insight, in that situation in Las Vegas, that contractor, just not for that mistake they made, but others, was terminated, and we brought in a new contractor. So it's really about training and ensuring that we have a strong contract that has penalties and standards of care that are consistent with what we're trying to do in Canada.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I guess the final question that I have for you is, what is your when will you be reporting back on the progress of all of these initiatives that you have? Obviously, we've heard the desire of this committee to have information provided to us on some of the progress, some of the investments, spending that you've made. How do you report back to internally and publicly on whether these initiatives are actually meeting their goals? We heard today from the Auditor General a bit on, well-meaning programs are fine, but the reporting and the measuring of the impacts are also important. So what are your, how are you reporting back to Canadians on whether or not the things you're putting in place are actually making a difference for passengers with disabilities?
Okay. Thank you for the question, and a very, very interesting question. So internally, certainly our senior leadership group, including me, gets data on a regular basis on how we're doing, both in terms of the initiatives being put in place, the adherence to those initiatives, and of course the number of complaints, which hopefully is declining as a result of these initiatives. So that's internal. External reporting, we really haven't talked about much internally, but it is a good reminder to me to look at that situation as part of an annual report, or part of a proxy, or part of an AIF, or all the other public documents that we provide that the public does know that we are doing better. We certainly have some literature in some of our public documents now about accessibility, but it does not include many numbers, if any. I think your point is well taken, that that should be enhanced as time goes on with some numbers as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russo, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. And the 4 minutes remaining is yours, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start off with a statement followed by a question, Mr. Chairman. What I'm most interested in, Mr. Russo, is the harmonizing of procedures based on the harmonizing of standards. Frankly, it's not just about the airlines. It's an end-to-end experience for the customer. That includes all the partners from the time the individual gets to the curb until the time they land and get to their destination. With that said, there's an expected level of service that all providers are going to be at the table with. And once again, to harmonize those procedures based on harmonized standards is extremely important. Although Mr. Muse and the Conservatives don't feel that or don't value public consultation and consultation with the partners, we do. Hence the reason why on May 9th we are going to have that consultation, call it whatever you want, an accessibility summit, public consultation. Bottom line is that we're going to be discussing with all partners the level of service that is expected, and with that, reaching for those outcomes that we want to establish. So my question is, do you feel that during this process, Mr. Russo, that the airport, CATSA, CBSA, international partners, airlines, and of course, most importantly, the disability community this would be an opportunity to, in fact, work towards harmonizing those procedures based on the standards established. And then, of course, with that, a strategic plan, action plans, and, of course,